So this is part one of interest groups. Okay, first thing we're going to look at is what is an interest group. Just be aware that interest groups are a linkage institution, just like political parties, what we just studied. So it links politicians in the political process to the American people. Okay, so the role of a political party is to get somebody elected to office and get their ideas into law. An interest group, a special interest group, focuses on a specific thing. Like the good examples of interest groups are the National Rifle Association. So they focus on the Second Amendment. The Chamber of Commerce, the United States Chamber of Commerce, focuses on needs of businesses. The American Medical Association focuses on the needs of doctors and patients and nurses in the healthcare system. Okay, so they are part of the policy-making process. They compete either amongst themselves or with other groups to influence the bureaucracy, the president, and Congress. So not only getting laws passed, but also once laws are passed, how they're enforced. Okay? Now, we've talked about this before, the iron triangle. Okay, this is a relationship amongst groups within the political process. In this case, it's members of Congress, the leaders of the bureaucracy. That's when we talked about it, when we looked at the bureaucracy. But the third part are the interest groups. Okay, and the interest groups, a lot of times, it's hard to come in from the outside into this iron triangle. Okay, so for instance, a lot of retired members of Congress, once they're done being a senator or a representative, a lot of times they're hired by interest groups to be political lobbyists. They know the system. They know how it works. So it makes sense for somebody. They're called lobbyists, by the way. An interest group's the person that works with members of Congress and tries to get legislation passed or tries to block legislation that's not favorable to their group. It's hard to get into this iron triangle, because they interact with each other. Okay? Another way to look at it is I look at an interest group as a mini political party. Instead of focusing on Democratic ideas or Republican ideas or Libertarian or Green Party ideas, they're even more focused than that. They're hyper-focused on a specific issue. And later on this week and also next week, you'll take a look at some specific interest groups to help you illustrate what exactly that means. Okay, so an interest group, let's get a definition down. Collection of people who share a common interest or an attitude and seek to influence the government for specific ends. Interest groups usually work, this is the important part, within the framework of government and employ tactics such as lobbying to achieve those goals. There are a number of bills that are written by members of Congress that actually their interest groups will help write them. I'm in the National Education Association. That's the interest group that I'm in. If there is any kind of legislation that deals with the education process at the national level or the state level, state of Ohio level, the politicians will run that by the lobbyists that are in the National Education Association and the Ohio Education Association. Okay, so they don't necessarily write word for word the legislation, but they influence even the bill writing process. So to be in an interest group people tend to be pretty powerful. A movement, you've heard of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the American Indian movement, the LGBTQ movement. Okay, it's a large body of people compared to an interest group, a large body of people. So usually people in a movement, there's more people in a movement than in an interest group. They have a concern of continuing significance. Okay, and they're willing to take action. They seek to change not only just politics, but people's attitudes and institutions. So the women's rights movement was interested in making laws that tried to get rid of discrimination in the United States towards women. Okay? But they also sought to change the business climate for women. They also sought to change the role of women within families, so that a movement is a lot bigger than an interest group. An interest group specifically focuses on politics and getting laws passed or blocking laws that are unfavorable to the group's ideas. Okay, a movement is much, much bigger. It includes politics and really all of society. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. This is not important. Okay, so now that you know what an interest group is, I don't know if you remember reading way back earlier in the school year, the Federalist Papers. Okay, James Madison wrote about factions, and a lot of you are kind of confused about what is a faction. Faction is a smaller group of people who have a common interest politically. Okay, and Madison, a lot of people back then looked at democracies around the world throughout history and said they've always failed. So when is our democracy going to fail? And Madison said, no, it's not going to fail. We have a big, large republic, and that's a good thing because you break up into special interest groups. He didn't call them that, but those were factions. Basically, that's what they are, either political parties, which is a larger faction, or a smaller faction, which is an interest group, a special interest group. Okay? He said that they were united in some kind of common passion or interest, and adverse to the rights of other citizens. Okay, so that was the danger. But however, because we're such a large republic, these interest groups are small compared to the bigger political process. So what he means by this is like the National Rifle Association, a group that represents gun owners, and they protect the Second Amendment for gun owners. Okay, that is a very, very small group compared to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. So what he meant, if he could look forward into the 21st century, Madison would say, see, I was right, because you've got these big, big groups, and these little groups can't influence these big groups. They're overwhelmed by these big groups. So what the smaller groups have to do is band with these bigger groups, the political parties, to get their ideas passed into laws. Okay? You can only control its effects, okay, of these interest groups. That's what Madison said. He said, we're going to have political parties. We're going to have special interest groups. The only thing that you can do is to control their effects that they have. So we can't have a special interest group that's going to take over the United States government and rule in the name of the American Medical Association. It's never worked that way. They're just not big enough to be able to do that. Okay? All right. Now, what type of interest groups are there? There's interest groups that focus on business needs, on trades. So there's going to be an interest group that represents carpenters and plumbers, and so forth. There's labor unions. Labor unions are also a special interest group. So, if you work at a grocery store, you're in the United Grocer Workers Union. I think that's what it's called, Grocery Workers Union. That's a special interest group. And then there's professional associations like I told you about the American Medical Association and the one I'm in, which is the National Education Association. So their interest is the interest of that specific profession, doctors, nurses, teachers, whatever. Okay? There are also ideological or single interest groups. The Christian Coalition is within this framework. Okay? The Christian Coalition are people that are very religious, and they vote using their religious values. Okay? So the Christian Coalition is an example of that. The National Rifle Association, that'd be a single interest group. They're interested in protecting the Second Amendment. NARAL, I don't remember what that is, but they're a single interest group. The Club for Growth, which is a pro-business, capitalist type of group. Okay, so they focus on what makes American capitalism grow. There's public interest groups. This guy, Ralph Nader here, he started an organization called the Public Citizen. Okay, he got a start actually as somebody who wrote a book about a car which was called the Corvair, Chevy Corvair back in the 1960s. It was the poor man's Corvette. Corvettes are very expensive. A Corvair was a car that was sporty, but it was more practical, and it cost a lot less than a Corvette. The engine was in the back of the car. It was a rear-engine car. And he wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. And this Corvair would spin out of control. Even if you went around a turn at like 15 to 20 miles an hour, it spun out of control. And there were a lot of accidents and people died because of this. So that's where he got his start. And that was in 1965. That led to seatbelt laws. He said, you know, if you make a car, you're not going to make a totally 100% safe car. What we can do is put safety features in there that protect people in an accident. And the first one were seatbelts. And by law now, those used to be an option. The seatbelt, you had to pay extra for seatbelts in a car. Today, that's standard equipment. Same thing with airbags. The first kind of airbag was the driver's airbag, driver's side airbag, and you had to pay extra for that. But now we have airbags all around us, and less people are dying in traffic accidents. They're surviving traffic accidents. We're not having less traffic accidents. We're having more, actually, but less people are dying on the roads because of these safety features of cars. So this public citizen group that he founded their nickname became Nader's Raiders. So he became known in the public eye because of that. He ran for president a few times, from the Green Party in 1996 and 2000. Then he ran as an independent in 2004 and 2008. I always like to call him the Buffalo Bills of American presidential politics. Buffalo Bills have been to the Super Bowl four times, lost every time. Nader ran for president 4 times, lost every time. Okay, but this is a public interest group, so their interest is to help the American public. It's not necessarily a specific group like doctors or gun owners or teachers. Okay, so he says these seatbelt laws, you can argue that it helped everybody in the United States. There's foreign policy interest groups, okay, the Council on Foreign Relations, so they focus on positive relationships between America and other countries of the world. There's the American-Israeli Political Action Committee. They focus on getting American support for the survival of Israel, which I don't know if you know this, but Israel was founded as a nation after the Holocaust. It was where a lot of Jews who, when given the chance to leave Europe, they decided to, and they went back to what they considered their homeland, which was Israel, okay? Israel has been attacked a number of times by its neighbors, its Arab neighbors, and America has been Israel's #1 military supporter. So that group makes sure that support stays intact. There's public sector interest groups. Public sector are people that work for they are paid for through public funds. Okay, there's the National Governors Association. Okay, the NGA. That's headed by the governor of New York right now, and he's I forget his name. Cuomo. Last name Cuomo. He's been in trouble lately. He's been in the news. So he then lobbies, and the group lobbies the federal government to get states help from the national government. There's the National League of Cities, so that would be headed by mayors of large cities in the United States. The one I'm in, the National Education Association, I'm technically paid for through tax money. The school district collects tax money, and that's how my salary is paid, so I'm considered in a public sector interest group. Okay, now, how do these interest groups get their point across, not just to the public, but to politicians? Okay, they use everything a political party would use. They use publicity. They use mass media. They use the internet. They can help they could form a political party if they want to. There's been interest groups that have formed a political party. The oldest political party is Prohibition Party. That started on one single issue, which was banning alcohol in the United States. They use mass mailings. They have direct contact to citizens. They have direct contact with government. So they lobby. They try to influence politicians. They give money to campaigns, people running for office. And they also use something called litigation. So they would sue in court. So if Ralph Nader's group decides maybe these airbags aren't as safe, maybe they should deploy, instead of at 350 miles an hour, they should deploy at 150 miles an hour. I don't know that much about airbags, but they could do a class action lawsuit to force car companies to put safer airbags in there. I don't know if you remember the airbags. This has been 5 or 6 years now, but there were airbags that were manufactured in I think China, maybe Japan, I'm not sure. But there was shrapnel in those. Accidentally, there were, in the manufacturing process, pieces of metal got into the airbag. So when it deployed, it actually was like a bomb exploding, and the shrapnel got into people's faces and necks, and people lost their lives because of these airbags and the shrapnel. So anyway, there was a class action lawsuit against this company, and the company settled with them out of court. So that litigation is a very powerful technique for special interest groups. Okay, now let's talk specifically about the lobbyists. Okay, the lobbyists are employed by special interest groups, and they try to influence policy decisions. So they are a specific person that is paid by the special interest groups to influence politicians. Okay, they're called lobbyists. And the reason they're called lobbyists is because years and years ago, what lobbyists would do is hang out in the lobby of the legislature. Not actually go in the legislature, but they hang out in the hallway outside, which was known as the lobby. So the politicians would come out of their sessions, and the lobbyists would come up and say, hey, there's this bill's coming up for a vote. I think you should vote against it, and here's why, and give them some ideas on why they should vote against the bill or in favor of the bill, whatever. Nowadays, it's way more complicated than that. So they'll take people, these lobbyists will take politicians out to dinner and say, let's talk about this over dinner. Or they have been known to take politicians on trips to, in the middle of winter, that let's go to Hawaii and go on a golf trip. Well, who wouldn't want to go to Hawaii when there's snow on the ground in Ohio? I would. And then somebody else is going to pay for it. A free trip to Hawaii. All you got to do is listen to me for a little while. That's a win-win there, because the politicians get to hear their spiel, and they also, the lobbyists get to exert some influence. Now, you might think this is unfair to the average voter, the average person who is in what we call the attentive public. They pay attention to politics. Well, my response to that is always, that question is, they should join a special interest group or form their own special interest groups. Citizens for pure democracy or something like that. I don't know, the CDP. Actually, that would be CPD. And anyway, so they that's one thing that they can do, is they can form their own special interest groups. That's how the system works nowadays. And then on top of that, there's this revolving door. I talked about this before, where there's a lot of the lobbyists are ex-members of a legislature. And that's a great hire, because they already have contacts within the legislature, so they can help that special interest group. They can save them some time. Hire me. I'm an ex-state legislator. I know all these people still in the state legislature. I know how it works. I know how to get things done in the state legislature, even though I'm not a legislator anymore. Well, that's a great person to have as a lobbyist. They know the ins and outs. Okay? All right, so that's half of this. And we'll go over the other half, money in politics, which is a very complicated thing. We'll do that next week. So good luck with the assignments this week. Don't forget to fill out the chart. If you have any questions, send me an email or come into office hours.